The first time Abigail Zimmerman glimpsed the Diamond D Ranch sprawling across the Colorado landscape, her heart sank lower than the wagon wheels cutting through the dusty trail. After traveling 3 weeks from Philadelphia to Trinidad, Colorado Territory in 1876, she wondered if she'd made the most terrible mistake of her 22 years. The vast emptiness of the frontier stretched before her, so different from the crowded streets of her eastern home, making her question whether she could truly start anew in such a wild place. "We're here, Miss Zimmerman," announced the driver, pulling the team to a halt before a weathered but substantial ranch house. Diamond D Ranch, as promised. Abigail smoothed her travel-worn skirts and adjusted her bonnet, determined to make a good impression despite her exhaustion. Her culinary skills had secured her this position as cook for one of the largest cattle operations in Las Animas County, and she intended to prove her worth immediately. "Thank you," she replied, accepting the driver's hand as she stepped down. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and she squinted against the brightness, taking in the sprawling buildings of the ranch compound bunkhouse, barn, corrals, and various outbuildings scattered across the property. Before she could gather her thoughts, the front door of the main house swung open, and an older woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes emerged. "You must be Miss Zimmerman. I'm Martha Davis, housekeeper here at Diamond D. We've been counting the days till your arrival." Martha's warm welcome momentarily eased Abigail's anxiety. "Mr. Davis is away in Denver on business, but he'll return in a few days. Come inside, dear, you must be exhausted." Abigail followed Martha into the house, grateful for the cooler air inside. The main room was spacious and comfortable, if rustic by Philadelphia standards, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. "Your quarters are through here, next to the kitchen," Martha explained, leading her down a hallway. "It's small but private. Mr. Davis insisted our cook have proper accommodations." The room was indeed small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small chest of drawers. A window overlooked a vegetable garden behind the house. "It's perfect, thank you," Abigail said sincerely. After weeks on the road, sleeping in questionable accommodations, the modest room seemed like luxury. "Rest for a bit," Martha suggested. "The hands will be in for supper around 6. I've prepared something simple for tonight, but tomorrow the kitchen is yours." She paused. "I must warn you, they're a hungry lot, and they've been making do with my cooking since Mrs. Peterson left to care for her ailing mother back east. They'll be mighty pleased to have a proper cook again." After Martha left, Abigail sat on the edge of the bed, her thoughts racing. She'd come west to escape scandal, a broken engagement that had left her reputation tarnished through no fault of her own. When she'd seen the advertisement for a cook at her respectable ranch in Colorado, she jumped at the chance. Now she wondered if she could truly build a new life so far from everything familiar. With a deep breath, she unpacked her few belongings, including her most prized possessions. Her mother's recipe book and the collection of spices she'd carefully transported across the country. If she could win over the ranch hands with her cooking, perhaps she could find acceptance in this strange new world. After washing away the dust of travel, Abigail changed into a fresh dress and made her way to the kitchen. It was larger than she expected, well equipped with a massive iron stove, ample workspace, and a pantry stocked with staples. Martha had left a note explaining the inventory system and mentioning that fresh eggs and milk could be found each morning in the springhouse. Eager to familiarize herself with her new domain, Abigail examined the pantry contents. Her mind was already planning tomorrow's meals when the back door swung open, startling her. A tall man filled the doorframe, his broad shoulders blocking the light. His face was shadowed beneath a worn Stetson, but she could see the dust of the trail covering his clothes and boots. "You must be the new cook," he said, his voice deep and rough from trail dust. Abigail straightened her spine. "I am, Abigail Zimmerman, at your service." He removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked brown hair and the most startling blue eyes she'd ever seen. His face was tanned and weathered, with several days' worth of stubble shadowing his jaw. Despite his trail-worn appearance, there was something undeniably handsome about him. Keller Davis, he introduced himself simply. Abigail's eyes widened. Davis, you're the owner's son, he confirmed. Just got back from moving cattle to the north pasture. He stepped fully into the kitchen, and Abigail was struck by the sheer presence of him. Been out there 3 days eating nothing but beans and jerky. Thought I might find something worth eating before supper. His directness caught her off guard, but she recovered quickly. I've only just arrived myself, Mr. Davis. But perhaps I could prepare you something small to tide you over until dinner, he nodded, pulling out a chair at the kitchen table and sitting down heavily. Abigail turned to the pantry, determined to make a good first impression. She quickly found flour, butter, and the other ingredients she needed. While Keller Davis watched in silence, she mixed a batch of biscuit dough, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, she had the biscuits in the oven and was preparing a quick gravy with some of the preserved beef she found in the pantry, adding her own blend of spices from her precious collection. The kitchen filled with enticing aromas, and Abigail was pleased to notice Keller's interest piqued. When she placed the plate of hot biscuits smothered in savory gravy before him, his eyebrows raised slightly. It's not much, she apologized, but it should take the edge off your hunger. Keller picked up his fork, took a bite, and froze. His blue eyes widened and he stared at the plate, then back at her. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. He tried again, then simply shook his head and took another bite, seemingly lost in the flavor. Abigail felt heat rise to her cheeks under his intense gaze. Is something wrong, Mr. Davis? He finally found his voice, though it came out hoarse. Where did you learn to cook like this, Miss Zimmerman? My mother taught me, she replied, pleased by his reaction. She always said good food was a matter of simple ingredients and proper spices. Keller continued eating with single-minded focus. In all my 28 years, I've never tasted anything like this, and this is just something you threw together. Abigail couldn't help but smile. Wait until you see what I can do with proper preparation time and ingredients. For the first time, a smile cracked his serious expression, transforming his face completely. I believe the Diamond D just made the best hire in its history. As Keller finished every last morsel on his plate, Abigail felt a small spark of hope. Perhaps this new beginning would work out after all. The dinner bell rang promptly at 6 o'clock, summoning the ranch hands from the bunkhouse and fields. Abigail stood nervously by the stove as Martha served the meal she'd prepared, a simple beef stew and cornbread, but nothing compared to what Abigail planned for the following day. The dining room filled with the sounds of hungry men, their conversation halting when Keller introduced her as the new cook. She felt their curious stares as she nodded politely. Miss Zimmerman will begin her duties properly tomorrow, Keller announced. I've had a sample of her cooking, and I can assure you the wait will be worth it. Later that night, lying in her new bed, Abigail listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, distant cattle lowing, the occasional whinny from the horses in the corral, the creaking of the house as it settled. She thought of Keller Davis and the look on his face when he'd tasted her cooking. His speechless reaction had been gratifying, but there was something about the intensity of his blue eyes that made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with professional pride. She pushed such thoughts aside. She hadn't come to Colorado to find a husband, especially not the son of her employer. She'd come to escape the whispers and judgment, to build a respectable life far from the shadow of scandal. Romance was the last thing she needed. Still, as sleep claimed her, Abigail couldn't help but wonder what tomorrow would bring. Dawn broke clear and bright over Diamond D Ranch, and Abigail was already awake, eager to begin her first full day. She dressed quickly in a practical work dress and pinned her chestnut hair in a simple bun, then made her way to the kitchen. The ranch would be expecting breakfast, and she intended to exceed expectations. The springhouse yielded fresh eggs, milk, and butter as promised. In the garden behind the house, she gathered herbs and ripe tomatoes. By the time Martha arrived to help, Abigail had a batch of sourdough bread rising, bacon frying, and was preparing to make fluffy omelets filled with herbs and cheese. My goodness, Martha exclaimed. You're certainly eager to begin, Abigail smiled. I want to prove myself worthy of the position. After what Keller told me about those biscuits yesterday, I don't think you need to worry, Martha assured her. That boy's not one for exaggeration. If he says your cooking is extraordinary, then it must be. A flush of pleasure warmed Abigail's cheeks as she continued her preparations. When the breakfast bell rang, the dining room quickly filled with ranch hands, their expressions shifting from sleepy to interested as they caught the aromas wafting from the kitchen. Abigail watched anxiously from the doorway as the men tasted her cooking. Their reactions ranged from appreciative murmurs to outright exclamations of delight. Keller, seated at the head of the table, caught her eye and nodded his approval, the hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The following days fell into a pleasant rhythm. Abigail rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, planned and executed hearty midday meals, and created substantial suppers for the hard-working ranch hands. She found satisfaction in seeing empty plates return to the kitchen and hearing the men's compliments. Keller remained something of a mystery. He was often absent, riding out early to work with the cattle or check the fences, returning late and eating whatever she'd kept warm for him. When their paths did cross, their exchanges were brief but increasingly comfortable. She noticed he seemed to find more reasons to pass through the kitchen, often stopping to sample whatever she was preparing. On her 5th day at the ranch, Abigail was in the kitchen garden harvesting vegetables for supper when she heard approaching hoofbeats. Looking up, she saw Keller dismounting from his horse, leading another saddled horse behind him. "Miss Zimmerman," he called, "do you ride?" Abigail brushed soil from her hands. "I do, though it's been some years. Would you care to join me? I need to check on a section of the north pasture, and I thought you might appreciate seeing more of the ranch." He paused. "Unless your duties keep you here." Surprised by the invitation, Abigail hesitated. "I've already prepared the dough for tonight's bread. It needs to rise for several hours." "Perfect timing, then," Keller said. "We'll be back well before you need to tend to it." Curiosity won out over caution. "I'll need a few minutes to change." 20 minutes later, Abigail emerged from the house wearing her one riding skirt, a relic from her life in Philadelphia where she'd occasionally ridden in the park. Keller was waiting patiently, holding the reins of both horses. "This is Daisy," he said, indicating the smaller of the two horses, a dappled gray mare. "She's gentle but sure-footed." Abigail approached the horse, stroking her velvet nose. "She's beautiful." Keller offered his cupped hands to help her mount, and Abigail felt a jolt of awareness as she placed her boot in his palms, and he boosted her effortlessly into the saddle. His hands were calloused but gentle, his strength evident in the ease with which he lifted her. Once she was settled, Keller mounted his own horse, a powerful bay stallion, and they set off at an easy pace. The late morning sun was warm but not unbearable, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of sage and wildflowers. "How are you finding ranch life?" Keller asked as they rode side by side. "Different from Philadelphia in every possible way," Abigail admitted, "but I'm enjoying the change more than I expected." "And the cooking arrangements suit you?" "Very much. Your father has provided an excellent kitchen," Keller nodded. "Pa believes in investing in what matters. Good food keeps the hands happy and working hard." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the landscape opening up before them rolling hills covered in prairie grass, stands of pine and aspen in the distance, and the majestic Rockies forming a dramatic backdrop. "It's breathtaking," Abigail murmured. "That it is," Keller agreed, though when she glanced at him, he was looking not at the scenery but at her, his blue eyes intense. Flustered, Abigail turned her attention back to the trail. "You were born here, born and raised," he confirmed. "Pa came out from Missouri right after the war, brought my mother as a bride, built the ranch from nothing." Pride colored his voice. "Ma died when I was 12. Pneumonia took her one harsh winter. Pa and I kept going, built the ranch into what you see today." "I'm sorry about your mother," Abigail said softly. Keller nodded his acknowledgement. And you, what brings a Philadelphia lady all the way to Colorado to cook for a bunch of cowboys? Abigail tensed, unsure how much to reveal. I wanted a fresh start, she said carefully. And I've always loved cooking. The position seemed perfect. If Keller sensed there was more to the story, he didn't press. Instead, he pointed toward a distant ridge. That's where we're headed. One of the hands reported a section of fence down. I want to see if it needs immediate repair. They continued riding, the conversation flowing more easily as they went. Keller told her about the ranch, 5,000 acres, 400 head of cattle, and plans for expansion. Abigail shared stories of her culinary education under her mother's guidance and her dreams of someday publishing a cookbook. At the ridge, they dismounted to inspect the fence. Keller worked quickly, making a temporary repair and noting what supplies would be needed for a permanent fix. Abigail wandered a short distance away, captivated by a patch of wildflowers growing among the rocks. Mountain columbine, Keller said, coming to stand beside her. Colorado's state flower. They're lovely, Abigail replied, bending to examine the delicate blue petals. Like you, Keller said softly, then immediately looked away, as if surprised by his own words. The unexpected compliment left Abigail speechless. Before she could respond, Keller cleared his throat and suggested they head back to the ranch. The return journey was quieter, both lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the ranch, Abigail broke the silence. "Thank you for showing me the land," she said sincerely. "It helps to understand where I am, to feel less adrift." Keller's expression softened. "You're welcome, Miss Zimmerman. Perhaps we could ride again sometime. There's much more to see." "I'd like that," she replied, and meant it. When they returned to the ranch yard, Keller helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Their eyes met briefly before he stepped back, maintaining proper distance. "I look forward to supper," he said, his voice carrying a hint of something more than simple anticipation for food. As Abigail hurried back to the kitchen to check on her bread dough, she found herself humming softly, her spirits lighter than they'd been in months. That evening, she prepared a special meal: roast beef with a rich gravy seasoned with herbs from the garden, potatoes roasted with rosemary, fresh vegetables. And for dessert, an apple pie with a perfectly flaky crust. The dining room filled with appreciative murmurs as the ranch hands tucked into the feast. Keller, seated at the head of the table, caught her eye as she brought out the pie. The look they exchanged was brief, but charged with unspoken meaning. Later, after the dishes were washed and the kitchen set to rights, Abigail stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. She wrapped her shawl tighter against the evening chill, but made no move to go back inside, savoring the peaceful moment. "Beautiful night," Keller's voice came from the shadows of the porch, startling her. "You surprised me," she said, turning to find him leaning against a post, his face half illuminated by the light spilling from the house windows. "Sorry," he replied, though he didn't sound particularly repentant. He moved to stand beside her, looking up at the stars. "You can't see stars like this in the city, can you?" "No," Abigail agreed. "In Philadelphia, the gas lamps and coal smoke obscure much of the night sky. This is magnificent." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, the vastness of the night sky making their proximity seem both intimate and insignificant. "That pie tonight," Keller said finally, "reminded me of my mother's. She had a way with pastry that no one could match." He paused. "Until now." The simple comparison touched Abigail deeply. "Thank you, that's a meaningful compliment." "I don't give compliments lightly, Miss Zimmerman." "Abigail," she said impulsively. "Please call me Abigail when we're not, when it's just us." Keller turned to face her fully, his expression serious in the dim light. "Abigail," he repeated, as if testing the feel of her name. "Then you must call me Keller." The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility. Then from the bunkhouse came the sound of raucous laughter, breaking the spell. "I should retire," Abigail said reluctantly. "Dawn comes early." "Indeed it does," Keller agreed. He hesitated, then added, "Sleep well, Abigail." "Good night, Keller," she replied, the informality of using his given name sending a small thrill through her. As she prepared for bed that night, Abigail couldn't help but reflect on how quickly her life had changed. A month ago, she'd been nursing a broken heart and damaged reputation in Philadelphia, seeing no way forward. Now here she was in Colorado, finding unexpected purpose and perhaps something more on a cattle ranch miles from civilization. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Abigail was preparing breakfast when Martha burst into the kitchen, excitement written across her normally composed features. "Mr. Davis is returning today. A messenger just arrived with the news. He'll be here by supper time." Abigail felt a flutter of nervousness. She'd yet to meet her employer, and first impressions were crucial. "I'll prepare something special for supper," she promised. Martha squeezed her arm reassuringly. "Don't worry, dear. Keller's been sending glowing reports about your cooking in his letters to his father. Mr. Davis is already inclined to think well of you." The day passed in a flurry of activity. Abigail threw herself into preparing an impressive meal, a crown roast of pork, her special sage and apple stuffing, glazed carrots, fresh rolls, and a decadent chocolate cake for dessert. By late afternoon, the kitchen was filled with mouth-watering aromas, and everything was proceeding on schedule. She was just checking the roast when she heard the sound of horses and wagons in the yard, multiple vehicles by the sound of it. Curious, she wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the kitchen window. A large wagon was being unloaded in the yard, with several ranch hands carrying crates and barrels toward the storage shed. Directing the activity was a tall man who bore a striking resemblance to Keller, though with gray hair and a fuller beard. This must be Douglas Davis, the ranch owner. As she watched, Keller emerged from the barn and greeted his father with a warm handshake that turned into a brief embrace. The obvious affection between them made Abigail smile, even as she felt a pang of homesickness for her own family back east. Her attention was drawn to a second wagon, where two women were being helped down by the driver. One was older, perhaps in her 50s, dressed in expensive traveling clothes. The other was younger, closer to Abigail's own age, fashionably attired and quite beautiful even at this distance. Martha appeared beside Abigail at the window. "Oh my," she murmured. "It seems Mr. Davis has brought guests. Who are they?" Abigail asked, watching as Keller greeted the women with formal bows. "I don't recognize them," Martha admitted, "but we'd better set extra places for supper." As they hurried to make the necessary adjustments, Abigail couldn't help but notice Keller escorting the younger woman toward the house, her gloved hand resting lightly on his arm. A strange twinge of disappointment settled in her chest, which she firmly told herself was ridiculous. Whatever tentative connection she'd felt with Keller Davis was clearly one-sided and inappropriate given their respective positions. The kitchen door swung open, and Keller entered, his expression unreadable. "Abigail," he said, then corrected himself. "Miss Zimmerman, my father has returned with unexpected guests. Will supper be adequate for 4 additional people?" "Of course," Abigail replied professionally. "I prepared generously." "Good," Keller nodded. "My father is eager to meet you. And he's brought the Hendersons' old family friends from Denver. They'll be staying for several days." Before Abigail could respond, the kitchen door opened again, admitting Douglas Davis himself, a commanding presence despite the dust of travel. "So this is our new cook," he exclaimed, his voice booming in the confines of the kitchen. "Miss Zimmerman, my son has written so enthusiastically about your culinary talents that I'm positively famished with anticipation." Abigail curtsied slightly. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Davis. Welcome home." "Something smells divine," Douglas continued, inhaling deeply. "What feast have you prepared for us tonight?" Abigail described the menu, watching as Douglas's eyes lit up with each item. "Marvelous, simply marvelous," he declared. "The Hendersons are in for a treat." "Catherine has been complaining about the hotel food in Denver for weeks." He turned to his son. "Keller, make sure the good wine is brought up from the cellar. This calls for proper celebration." Keller nodded, his expression still oddly tight. "Yes, sir." Will you be showing our guests to their rooms now? Indeed, indeed. Miss Zimmerman will dine at 7 tonight if that suits your timing. Perfectly, sir, Abigail assured him. After Douglas left, Keller lingered in the kitchen. I should have warned you, he said quietly. I had no idea my father was bringing guests. It's no trouble, Abigail replied, though in truth she was feeling the pressure of serving her first formal dinner to not only her employer but guests of obvious social standing. Keller hesitated, seeming about to say something more, then simply nodded and departed, leaving Abigail to wonder at his unusual reticence. Supper that evening was served in the formal dining room, a space Abigail had barely glimpsed since her arrival. Martha helped her arrange everything beautifully, with the family's best china and silver on display. From the kitchen, Abigail could hear the conversation and laughter as the Davis men entertained their guests. She caught glimpses of the gathering when she brought out each course. Douglas at the head of the table, Keller to his right, the older Henderson woman beside Douglas, and the younger Miss Henderson beside Keller, hanging on his every word. The meal was received with effusive compliments, particularly from Douglas, who proclaimed each dish better than the last. Even Mrs. Henderson, who initially seemed reserved, expressed her admiration for the chocolate cake. You simply must share your secret with our cook, she told Abigail directly. I've never tasted such a perfectly moist cake. Only Miss Henderson seemed less than impressed, picking at her food with delicate disinterest, and directing most of her attention to Keller, who appeared increasingly uncomfortable as the evening progressed. After the dessert plates were cleared, Abigail retired to the kitchen, exhausted but satisfied with her first formal dinner service. She was just finishing the washing up when the door opened, and Douglas Davis entered, his expression jovial. Miss Zimmerman. That was the finest meal I've had in years, he declared. My son did not exaggerate your talents one bit. Thank you, sir, Abigail replied, pleased by his enthusiasm. I'm glad it met with your approval. More than approval, absolute delight. Douglas leaned against the doorframe. Tell me, how are you finding Diamond D? Is everything to your satisfaction? Very much so, Abigail assured him. Everyone has been most welcoming and the kitchen is excellently equipped. Good, good, and is there anything you need? Any improvements I might make to ensure you stay with us for a good long while? Touched by his consideration, Abigail thought for a moment. Perhaps some additional herb plantings in the kitchen garden. Fresh herbs make such a difference in cooking. Consider it done, Douglas said immediately. Anything else? Nothing I can think of, sir. You've provided a wonderful working environment. Douglas nodded, satisfied. Excellent. Well, I won't keep you from your rest. The Hendersons will be with us for the next few days. Victoria, Miss Henderson, has expressed a desire to see the ranch operations. He chuckled. Though between you and me, I suspect her interest lies more with the rancher than the ranch. Abigail felt a cold knot form in her stomach at his implication. I see. Her father and I have long thought it would be a good match, Douglas continued, oblivious to Abigail's discomfort. The Hendersons are an old Denver family with excellent connections. Such an alliance would benefit Diamond D considerably. I'm sure Mr. Keller will make the choice that's best for the ranch, Abigail managed to say, keeping her voice neutral. Douglas laughed. That boy's always been stubborn about following his own mind, but even he can see the advantages. Well, good night, Miss Zimmerman. I look forward to breakfast with equal anticipation. After he left, Abigail sank into a chair, suddenly drained. The idea of Keller and Miss Henderson as a couple shouldn't affect her so strongly. After all, what had she expected? That the son of a prosperous rancher would form an attachment to a cook. It was foolish, yet the disappointment cutting through her was undeniable. She reminded herself firmly that she'd come to Colorado to rebuild her life, not to find romance. The Diamond D offered respectable employment and a chance to practice the cooking she loved. That would have to be enough. The following days proved challenging for Abigail. The presence of the Hendersons meant additional work, with formal meals served 3 times daily. Victoria Henderson made no effort to hide her interest in Keller, attaching herself to him at every opportunity, and making pointed remarks about how a ranch this size needed a proper mistress. Keller, for his part, was unfailingly polite to the Hendersons but increasingly withdrawn. The easy camaraderie he and Abigail had begun to develop seemed to vanish completely. Their interactions became strictly professional, limited to brief discussions about meal planning. On the third day of the Hendersons' visit, Abigail was in the garden gathering tomatoes for luncheon when she overheard voices from the other side of the tall rosemary hedge. "Keller, darling, you can't possibly prefer this wilderness to Denver society," Victoria Henderson's voice carried clearly. "Father says your ranch is the most promising in the territory, but surely you don't intend to spend your entire life out here among the cattle and cowboys." "The wilderness, as you call it, is my home, Victoria," Keller replied, his tone cooler than Abigail had ever heard it. "Diamond D isn't just a business investment, it's my legacy and my future." Of course, Victoria backpedaled. "I only meant that with the right connections which I could provide you could expand your operations considerably without having to be so hands-on." "Being hands-on is precisely how my father built this ranch and how I intend to continue running it," Keller said firmly. There was a pause, then Victoria's voice turned honeyed. "You're so dedicated. It's one of the things I admire about you. I'm simply suggesting that together we could build something even greater. Father is very impressed with you, you know. He's already hinted that a substantial wedding gift would be forthcoming." Abigail shouldn't be listening. She knew it was wrong, yet she found herself frozen in place, barely breathing. "Victoria," Keller said after a long moment, "I'm honored by your family's high opinion, but I think we may have different visions for the future." "Don't be hasty," Victoria urged. "We've known each other since we were children. Our families have always assumed we would eventually marry. It makes perfect sense for both of us." "Perfect sense doesn't always make for perfect happiness," Keller responded quietly. "I think whatever he thought was cut off by the lunch bell ringing from the main house." Abigail quickly gathered her tomatoes and hurried back to the kitchen, her mind racing with what she'd overheard. That evening, after dinner had been served and the dishes washed, Abigail stepped outside for some fresh air. The night was cooler than usual, with a brisk wind sweeping down from the mountains. She wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders and wandered toward the garden, seeking solitude. To her surprise, she found Keller there, seated on a bench beside the herb beds, looking up at the stars. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, his expression clearing when he recognized her. "Abigail," he said, standing. "I mean Miss Zimmerman." "Please don't stand on formality," she said, emboldened by the darkness. "Not after everything." Keller gestured to the bench beside him. "Join me, it's a magnificent night for stargazing." Abigail hesitated, then sat, maintaining a proper distance between them. "Your guests seem to be enjoying their stay," she ventured. "Mrs. Henderson, perhaps," Keller said wryly. "Victoria finds ranch life tedious. She's made that abundantly clear." "Yet she seems quite interested in the rancher," Abigail couldn't help observing. Keller's laugh held little humor. "Victoria is interested in what she imagines I represent: security, status, the chance to remake Diamond D into something more civilized. She doesn't understand that I have no desire to change what my father and I have built." "I think it's wonderful," Abigail said softly. "What you've created here, it has an honesty to it, a genuineness that's rare." Keller turned to look at her, his expression intent. "That's exactly it. You understand in a way she never could." The compliment warmed her, but reality intruded. "Your father seems to favor the match," she said carefully. "My father sees the business advantages," Keller admitted, "but he also wants me to be happy. He and my mother married for love against her family's wishes. He won't force me into a loveless marriage, no matter how advantageous." Relief flooded through Abigail, followed immediately by self-reproach. It wasn't her place to have opinions about Keller Davis's marital prospects. "And you?" Keller asked unexpectedly. "What brought you all the way from Philadelphia to Colorado, the true reason, not just seeking employment?" Abigail stiffened, then slowly exhaled. Perhaps it was time for honesty. "I was engaged," she began, her voice quiet, To the son of my father's business partner, it seemed a suitable match. We'd known each other for years, our families were close. But 3 weeks before the wedding, I discovered he'd been unfaithful. Keller's expression darkened. The scoundrel. It gets worse, Abigail continued. When I confronted him, he claimed I was being unreasonable, that such indiscretions were common among men of his class. When I refused to accept his explanation and broke the engagement, he spread rumors that I had been the unfaithful one. That's despicable, Keller said, genuine outrage in his voice. Abigail nodded. My father believed me, of course, but Philadelphia society preferred the more scandalous version. Overnight, I became a pariah. Former friends crossed the street to avoid speaking to me, invitations dried up, even my sister's prospects were affected. She sighed. When I saw the advertisement for a cook in Colorado, it seemed like divine providence, a chance to go somewhere no one knew me or the lies told about me. I'm sorry that happened to you, Keller said softly, but I can't help being selfishly glad it brought you here. The simple statement, spoken with such sincerity, made Abigail's breath catch. Before she could respond, the back door of the house opened, spilling light into the garden. Keller, are you out here? Victoria Henderson's voice called. Your father is looking for you. Keller stood quickly, his expression regretful. We'll continue this conversation another time, he promised in a low voice. Then louder, I'm here, Victoria, coming now. Abigail remained on the bench after he left, her thoughts in turmoil. For the first time since arriving in Colorado, she allowed herself to acknowledge that her feelings for Keller Davis had grown beyond mere appreciation or friendship. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. The following morning brought unexpected news. At breakfast, Douglas Davis announced that urgent business required his presence in Denver immediately. The Hendersons have graciously offered to travel back with me, he explained. We'll leave after luncheon. Victoria looked distinctly unhappy with this development, but her mother nodded agreeably. We've imposed on your hospitality long enough, Douglas. Besides, Victoria has preparations to make for the governor's ball next month. She turned to Keller with a meaningful smile. We do hope you'll attend, Keller. Victoria would be devastated if you couldn't escort her. Keller's response was non-committal, but it was clear from Victoria's expression that she considered it settled. Throughout the morning, as Abigail prepared a substantial traveling lunch for the departing guests, Victoria made several trips to the kitchen, ostensibly to compliment the cooking but clearly to remind Abigail of her connection to Keller. Keller and I have known each other since childhood, she mentioned casually while watching Abigail pack sandwiches. Our mothers were dear friends and always hoped we would marry. Now that we're both of age, it seems their wishes may come true. Abigail kept her expression neutral. How fortunate to have such a long acquaintance, she replied evenly. The roast beef is particularly good in these sandwiches. I've included extra for you. Victoria's smile tightened at Abigail's failure to show interest in her matrimonial hints. Yes, well, I'm sure Denver society will be abuzz when our engagement is announced. Perhaps we'll even be married before Christmas. Miss Henderson, Abigail said, her patience wearing thin, I'm sure Mr. Davis will make his intentions clear in his own time. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to finish these preparations. Victoria's face flushed with indignation, but before she could respond, Martha entered the kitchen, effectively ending the uncomfortable exchange. By early afternoon, the Davises were bidding farewell to their guests. From the kitchen window, Abigail watched as Douglas helped Mrs. Henderson into the wagon, while Keller assisted Victoria. Just before stepping up, Victoria threw her arms around Keller's neck in an embrace that lasted a moment too long for propriety. When she finally released him, she said something that made Douglas laugh heartily, though Keller's expression remained inscrutable. As the wagon pulled away, Abigail turned back to her work, telling herself that the departure of the Hendersons changed nothing. She had a position to fulfill, and personal feelings had no place in her professional life. Later that evening, after serving a simple supper to the remaining ranch hands, most having ridden out with Douglas to escort him partway to Denver, Abigail was surprised when Keller appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Might I have a word, Miss Zimmerman?" he asked formally. "Of course, Mr. Davis," she replied, matching his tone while wondering at his sudden reversion to formality. "Not here," he said, glancing around the kitchen. "Would you walk with me? The evening is pleasant." Curiosity piqued, Abigail removed her apron and followed him outside. The sun was setting, painting the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Keller led the way toward a small rise just beyond the main house, where a bench had been placed to take advantage of the view. "My mother loved sunsets," he explained as they sat. "My father built this bench for her so she could watch the colors change over the mountains." "It's a beautiful spot," Abigail said softly, touched by the sentiment behind the simple wooden seat. They sat in silence for a moment, watching as the sun slipped lower, the colors deepening to crimson and purple. "Victoria expects me to propose," Keller said abruptly. Abigail kept her eyes fixed on the horizon. "Yes, she made that quite clear. To everyone, it seems," Keller sighed. "She told my father this morning that she anticipates an announcement by the governor's ball." "And will there be one?" Abigail asked, proud of how steady her voice remained despite the painful tightening in her chest. Keller turned to face her fully. "That depends entirely on you, Abigail." Startled, she met his gaze. "On me? I don't understand." "I think you do," Keller said gently. "From the moment you arrived at Diamond D, something changed. You brought not just extraordinary food, but a warmth, a sense of home that had been missing since my mother died." He took a deep breath. "I know it's sudden, we've known each other barely 3 weeks, but in that time I've come to care for you in a way I never expected." Abigail stared at him, scarcely believing what she was hearing. "Please let me finish," he interrupted. "I'm not a man given to flowery speeches or grand gestures. I'm a rancher, plain and simple, but I know my own mind and heart. Victoria Henderson could never make me happy because she's not you." The directness of his declaration left Abigail speechless. When she found her voice, it emerged as barely more than a whisper. "What are you saying exactly?" Keller reached for her hand, his touch warm and certain. "I'm saying that I'm falling in love with you, Abigail Zimmerman, that I want to court you properly if you'll allow it. And that someday, if you come to return my feelings, I would be honored to make you my wife." Abigail's heart raced. This was everything she hadn't dared to hope for, yet fear held her back. "What about your father, the Hendersons, the advantages of such a match?" "My father wants a daughter-in-law who makes his son happy, not just one with social connections," Keller said firmly. "When I told him this morning how I feel about you, do you know what he said?" Abigail shook her head, hardly daring to believe. "He said, 'Any woman who can cook like that and put that look in your eyes is worth a dozen Victorias.'" Keller smiled at the memory. "He also mentioned that he hasn't enjoyed meals this much since my mother was alive. I think you've thoroughly won him over." "But I'm just a cook," Abigail protested weakly. "You're not just anything," Keller corrected her. "You're an extraordinary woman who faced scandal and hardship with dignity and courage, who traveled across the country alone to build a new life, who creates meals that render men speechless with delight." His smile widened. "Including me that first day when you made those biscuits and gravy, I quite literally forgot how to speak." The memory brought a smile to Abigail's face. "I did notice you seemed somewhat affected." "Affected is an understatement," Keller laughed. "I was completely undone, and not just by the food, though that was remarkable enough. There was something about you, your confidence, your grace under pressure. I couldn't stop thinking about you after that." The sun had nearly disappeared now, the first stars becoming visible in the darkening sky. In the gathering dusk, Abigail found the courage to speak her heart. "I've been fighting my feelings for you," she admitted, "telling myself it was inappropriate, impossible, that someone like Victoria Henderson was more suitable for you. And now," Keller asked, his voice hopeful. Abigail turned her hand in his, intertwining their fingers. "Now I think perhaps I've been given a second chance at happiness, one I never expected to find in Colorado territory." Keller's smile was radiant. "Is that a yes to my courtship?" "Yes," Abigail replied, her own smile matching his. "Though I'm not sure how it will work given that I'm employed by your family." We'll figure it out, Keller promised, together. As the last light faded from the sky, Keller leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. Instead, Abigail met him halfway, their lips coming together in a kiss that felt like coming home. The courtship of Abigail Zimmerman and Keller Davis became the talk of Trinidad and the surrounding ranches. Douglas Davis, far from objecting, seemed delighted by the development, telling anyone who would listen that his son had found a true treasure. The Henderson family's reaction was less enthusiastic, with rumors of Victoria's fury reaching even to Diamond D, but such gossip held little power to harm Abigail and her new community. Abigail continued her duties as cook, though Douglas insisted on hiring a kitchen assistant to lighten her workload. "Can't have my future daughter-in-law working herself to exhaustion," he declared. As summer turned to fall, Keller and Abigail's relationship deepened. They rode together nearly every day, Keller showing her the far reaches of Diamond D's holdings and sharing his dreams for the ranch's future. Abigail began experimenting with new recipes, planning elaborate Sunday dinners that became legendary throughout the county. Local families angled for invitations, and soon the Davis dining table was regularly filled with neighbors and friends. "You've turned our ranch into the social center of Las Animas County," Keller told her one evening as they sat together on their bench, watching the stars. "Father says our reputation has never been better. Food brings people together," Abigail replied, nestling against his side. "My mother always said a generous table creates goodwill that extends far beyond the meal." "Your mother was a wise woman," Keller said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I wish I could have known her," Abigail smiled wistfully. "She would have loved you and this place." She gestured toward the vast landscape spread before them. "She always said I had too much spirit for Philadelphia society. I think she knew I'd eventually find my way to somewhere with more room to breathe." "And have you found enough room?" Keller asked, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. Abigail turned to face him fully. "I've found everything I never knew I was looking for," she said honestly. "A place that feels like home, work that brings joy. People who value me for who I am, not who they expect me to be." She reached up to touch his face gently. "And a man who loves me for myself, flaws and all." "I do love you," Keller said softly, "more than I thought possible." "And I love you," Abigail replied, the words coming easily now, where once they had seemed so impossible. The first snow of the season fell in early November, blanketing Diamond D in pristine white. The cattle had been moved to the sheltered winter pastures, and the rhythm of ranch life slowed as it did every year during the colder months. On a particularly beautiful Sunday morning, with the sun turning the snow-covered landscape into a sea of diamonds, Keller suggested they ride to his favorite spot on the property, a small plateau overlooking a frozen creek, with the mountains rising majestically in the distance. "It's cold for a leisure ride," Abigail observed as they saddled their horses, though she was already bundled in her warmest clothes, eager for the adventure. "Worth it for the view," Keller promised. "And I've packed something to keep us warm." The ride was invigorating, their breaths forming clouds in the crisp air. When they reached the plateau, Abigail gasped at the beauty of the scene, untouched snow stretching for miles, the distant mountains sharp against the clear blue sky. "It's like looking at the world newly made," she said softly. Keller helped her dismount, then retrieved a heavy blanket and a small flask from his saddlebag. He spread the blanket on a flat rock cleared of snow and gestured for her to sit. When she was settled, he poured steaming coffee from the flask into 2 tin cups. "To ward off the chill," he explained, handing her a cup. They sat in companionable silence for a while, sipping the hot coffee and absorbing the vast beauty before them. "I've been thinking about the future," Keller said eventually. "About what I want for Diamond D, for myself." He turned to face her. "For us." Abigail's pulse quickened. "And what have you decided?" "That I don't want to wait any longer to begin that future." Setting aside his cup, Keller reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small box. "Abigail Zimmerman, you came to Diamond D to cook, and somehow ended up feeding not just our bodies but our souls. You've brought joy and warmth back to a home that had forgotten what those felt like." He opened the box, revealing a delicate gold ring set with a single perfect diamond. "Will you marry me, be my wife, my partner, the heart of our home?" Tears welled in Abigail's eyes, but they were tears of happiness. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, with all my heart." Keller slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms, his kiss a promise of the life they would build together. They were married on Christmas Eve in the Trinidad Church, with Douglas Davis beaming proudly as he escorted Abigail down the aisle. The church was filled with friends and neighbors, all eager to witness the union of two people whose love story had captured their imaginations. Abigail wore a gown of ivory silk that Martha had helped her make, with lace from her mother's wedding dress adorning the bodice. Keller, resplendent in a new suit ordered from Denver, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked toward him. The celebration afterward at Diamond D was everything Abigail had planned, tables groaning with delicious food, music filling the main room as couples danced, laughter and goodwill abundant. Douglas had invited the entire county, it seemed, and the house overflowed with well-wishers. "Have I told you how beautiful you are, Mrs. Davis?" Keller murmured as they danced together, oblivious to the admiring glances of their guests. "Several times," Abigail laughed softly, "but I don't mind hearing it again." "Beautiful, brilliant, and mine," Keller said, drawing her closer. "I'm the luckiest man in Colorado territory." As midnight approached, they slipped away from the celebration, leaving their guests to continue the festivities under Douglas's genial supervision. Keller had prepared a surprise, a small cabin on the property, recently renovated as their own private retreat until the addition to the main house was completed in the spring. "Your father mentioned you were building something," Abigail said as Keller carried her over the threshold. "But I had no idea it was this." The cabin was cozy and welcoming, with a roaring fire in the stone fireplace, comfortable furnishings, and to Abigail's delight a small but well-equipped kitchen. "I know how much you love to cook," Keller explained. "I thought you might enjoy having your own private space to experiment, away from feeding the whole ranch." Touched by his thoughtfulness, Abigail wrapped her arms around his neck. "It's perfect. Everything is perfect." As they stood before the fire, husband and wife at last, Abigail reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From heartbreak and scandal in Philadelphia to finding true love on a Colorado ranch, it was more than she had ever dared to hope for. "What are you thinking?" Keller asked, noticing her pensive expression. "That sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the most wonderful destinations," Abigail replied. "If anyone had told me a year ago that I would find happiness as the wife of a Colorado rancher, I would have thought them mad," Keller chuckled. "And if anyone had told me that tasting a plate of biscuits and gravy would change my life forever, I might have been equally skeptical." "It was quite a reaction," Abigail teased. "I've never seen anyone so thoroughly speechless over food." "It wasn't just the food," Keller admitted, drawing her closer. "It was the woman who made it. From that first moment, something in me recognized something in you, as if my heart knew yours before my mind could catch up." "How poetic," Abigail said softly, "for a plain and simple rancher." "You inspire poetry," Keller replied, his voice husky, "and much more." As the fire crackled and snow began to fall gently outside their window, Keller and Abigail sealed their wedding night with a kiss that held the promise of all the years to come, years that would indeed be filled with love, laughter, and, of course, extraordinary meals that would become the stuff of legend throughout Colorado territory. Spring came to Diamond D Ranch in a riot of wildflowers and new beginnings. The addition to the main house was completed just as the last snow melted, providing Abigail and Keller with a spacious wing of their own while maintaining close connection to Douglas and the heart of ranch operations. The new arrangement worked perfectly. Abigail continued to oversee the ranch's cooking, with the assistance now of 2 kitchen maids she had trained herself. Her culinary reputation spread throughout the territory, bringing visitors from as far as Denver eager to sample her famous Sunday dinners. Keller and Douglas worked together to expand Diamond D's operations, adding more cattle and purchasing additional land to the north. Abigail often rode with Keller to inspect the far reaches of their holdings, the two of them sometimes camping overnight beneath the stars, savoring the freedom and privacy such excursions afforded. One such evening, as they sat beside a small fire on the banks of the Purgatoire River, Abigail shared news she had been saving for the perfect moment. "I visited Dr. Morgan in town yesterday," she began, watching Keller's face in the firelight. Concern immediately furrowed his brow. "Are you unwell? You should have told me. I would have." "I'm not ill," Abigail interrupted, taking his hand. "Quite the opposite, in fact." She placed his palm against her still flat abdomen. "We're going to have a baby, Keller, in the autumn." Keller stared at her, his expression shifting from confusion to wonder to absolute joy in the span of heartbeats. "A baby? We're having a baby," Abigail nodded, her own happiness reflected in his eyes. "Dr. Morgan says everything appears healthy. The baby should arrive in late October." Keller whooped with delight, gathering her into his arms and spinning her around. "A baby? Wait until father hears. He's been hinting about grandchildren since the wedding." "I thought we might tell him when we return tomorrow," Abigail suggested when Keller finally set her back on her feet. "I've been planning a special dinner to celebrate the news." "Of course you have," Keller laughed, kissing her soundly. "Using food to mark life's most important moments, it's what you do best." The months that followed were busy ones for Diamond D. Douglas, ecstatic about becoming a grandfather, insisted on building a proper nursery adjacent to Keller and Abigail's bedroom. Keller, meanwhile, threw himself into ensuring the ranch's prosperity with even greater determination, now that he had a child's future to consider. As for Abigail, pregnancy suited her. Her natural vitality seemed enhanced rather than diminished by her condition, and she continued to manage the ranch's kitchen well into her 7th month, modifying her duties only when Keller and Douglas both insisted she rest more. On a golden October afternoon, with the aspen trees blazing yellow against the mountainsides, Abigail went into labor. Martha, who had experience assisting births, sent for the doctor and helped Abigail through the early stages while Keller paced anxiously outside their bedroom door. After hours of labor, as the sun was setting, their son was born a robust boy with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. When the doctor finally allowed Keller into the room, he approached the bed with awe, gazing down at his wife and newborn son with an expression of such profound love that Abigail felt tears spring to her eyes. "He's perfect," Keller whispered, gently touching his son's tiny hand. "Absolutely perfect. Would you like to hold him?" Abigail asked, carefully transferring the swaddled infant to his father's arms. Keller cradled the baby with surprising confidence. "What shall we name him?" They had discussed names during Abigail's pregnancy but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking at their son's face, Abigail knew. "James," she said softly. "James Douglas Davis, after my father and yours." Keller nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright. "James it is. Hello, James," he murmured to the baby. "Welcome to Diamond D. You're going to love it here." The addition of James to their family brought new joy to Diamond D. Douglas doted on his grandson, often carrying the baby around the ranch, proudly showing him the operations he would someday inherit. Keller proved to be a natural father, balancing his ranch responsibilities with time dedicated solely to his son. And Abigail discovered that motherhood, while challenging, brought her a fulfillment that complemented her roles as wife, cook, and ranch mistress. As James grew from infant to toddler, life at Diamond D settled into a new rhythm. Abigail's kitchen continued to be the heart of the ranch, but now with the added delight of a small boy helping with the baking, his face and clothes often dusted with flour. When James was 3, Abigail gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Elizabeth Martha, after both their mothers. With 2 young children, Abigail scaled back her cooking duties somewhat, focusing primarily on family meals and the special Sunday dinners that had become a tradition. By 1885, Diamond D Ranch had grown to become one of the most respected cattle operations in Colorado. The Davis family prosperity was evident not just in the expanded ranch holdings, but in the improvements to the main house and outbuildings. Douglas, now in his 60s but still vigorous, had gradually handed more responsibility to Keller, who proved to be an innovative and forward-thinking rancher. One summer evening, as Abigail and Keller sat on their favorite bench watching the sunset, 7-year-old James and 4-year-old Elizabeth playing nearby under Martha's watchful eye, Abigail reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. "When I stepped off that wagon 10 years ago, I never imagined all this," she said, gesturing to encompass not just the ranch but their family, their life together. Keller took her hand, his thumb caressing the gold band he'd placed there 9 years earlier. "When you arrived, I thought we were getting a cook. Instead, we got the missing piece that made Diamond D whole again." "It was your reaction to my cooking that first day," Abigail teased, "the way you couldn't speak after tasting those biscuits. It made me feel like maybe I had found somewhere I truly belonged." "Your cooking may have rendered me speechless," Keller admitted, "but it was you, your spirit, your strength, your heart that made me fall in love." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, 7-year-old James ran up to them, his sister toddling behind. "Papa, Mama, look what I found." James held up a perfect columbine flower, its blue petals delicate against his small hand. "It's beautiful," Abigail said, drawing both children into a gentle embrace, "just like our life here." Keller wrapped his arms around his family, his expression one of complete contentment. "10 years ago, a remarkable woman arrived at Diamond D to cook," he said softly. "Little did we know she would also teach us all how to truly live." As darkness fell over the Colorado rangeland and the first stars appeared in the vast sky, the Davis family made their way back to the warmth of their home, a home built not just of wood and stone but of love, resilience, and the extraordinary journey of a woman who had traveled west seeking only employment, but found instead her heart's true destination. And in the years that followed, the story of the Philadelphia cook and the Colorado rancher who forgot how to speak when he tasted her food became a favorite tale told throughout Las Animas County, a reminder that sometimes life's most unexpected turns lead to the most beautiful destinations.